For quite some time, I've been kicking around the idea of creating a city based extremely loosely on the young adult fiction trope of sort of artificially stratified societies. Like the government mandates that all of the politicians live over here in this neighborhood, and they don't interact with the artisans who live over here in this neighborhood who don't interact with the military and that kind of thing. It's not realistic or even desirable, I don't think, but it does lend itself to my tendency to build very distinct looking neighborhoods within the same city. So this way, all the neighborhoods can have a kind of backstory, which nobody really asked for, but here we are. Ignore that filthy freeway interchange, we'll come back and fix it later. Welcome to Allantia, and we're starting with the district that'll house, presumably, all the architects and engineers and that kind of thing. And the exercise was to try to imagine, not being a professional myself in any field, really, try to imagine what a road layout would look like if architects could build their own neighborhood without any government entity telling them that they can't do things. And my opinion is that the streets would probably be short, so it gives the neighborhood a kind of cozy feeling, and convoluted yet still very functional, so well connected, but you can't go straight anywhere, which would reduce traffic and sort of increase the feeling of density even though you're in this low density neighborhood, that kind of thing. As a personal aesthetic, I try to stay away from four-sided intersections, so you'll see a lot of three-way intersections, which will hopefully reduce traffic in the future. And of the four-way intersections that do exist, I've turned them into roundabouts, not necessarily because I believe in their efficacy in dealing with traffic, but because I think they make a really good focal point within neighborhoods and the city as a whole, especially when viewed from above, as we're doing right now. This is a temporary industrial zone. It's going to house my power and water for the time being, plus industrial zoning, as you'd expect. But down the line, that's all going to get replaced by Industries DLC buildings. I generally prefer my cities not to have any industrial zoning. Here comes the residential zoning, and you're seeing a little technique that I use where I'll build the blocks 4 units wide, but I'll only zone 2 units on one side. That allows 2x2 and 3x2 buildings to grow on one side, and then once that side is full, I'll zone the other side, so you get this dense little neighborhood that doesn't look like urban sprawl. This map is from the Steam Workshop. It's called Rhinestone Island. What you're seeing is a version that I've heavily modified. I removed about half of the landmass for a couple reasons. The first being the less landmass you have, the faster you'll hit milestones. It reduces the requirements on them. Little pro tip. And the other is because I don't have an especially beefy computer. And what little computing power I do have, I want to use on shadows and level of detail and not trying to simulate a million sims all at the same time. There's our first milestone. I'm going to build a little city services center, I guess. And money's kind of short right now, so it's going to take a little while longer than I like. And here, as I often do, I've just now realized that I have to leave space for public transit corridors. I think that I'm just not even going to touch buses for this build. Buses are all over the world, they're ubiquitous, but in city skylines they just have a bunch of problems that I don't like dealing with. So instead I'm planning for a tram system. I'm actually going to make it run up the left side of my city services center, so that space will stay unzoned for now. Down here by the coast, I'm building the blocks 5 units wide, and the intention is that there is an unzoned unit running down the middle of the block, just to allow for that change in elevation. It's purely aesthetic. The buildings themselves wouldn't care if they were back to back, but I like that little space so that the building isn't inside of a slope. I'll almost definitely come back and add trees to it later. There's another milestone, and I'm gonna build a quick and dirty park. A habit that I'm trying to break is just doing things quick and dirty if I don't intend to come back and fix it later. But I did do that with this park. It's just the bare minimum. I'm sorry. I'll come back and fiddle with it as it levels up. I will say, though, that I'm using bamboo for the paths, which is one of my favorite assets right now. Now I'm drawing my first district, and I've decided that I'm going to name the Engineers District House of Restless Wind. And my reasoning behind that is, well, not only is it very young adult fiction-y with just a touch of fantasy universe, but also I imagine that a lot of these engineers kind of work on contract. You know, they're not around very long, so they come in and they help with a project, and then they move on. And perhaps if you like, also a lot of our power grid is going to be wind power. I'm going to do mostly renewables here. Whatever, there it is, House of Restless Wind. I will say also that the name is inspired in part by the indie game House of the Dying Sun, which is a really atmospheric game, and it left an impression on me. So here is an echo of the title of that game. Starting another park over here. This one's going to be a nature reserve, and I've decided to call it Ironwood. I want it to be filled with really big trees, primarily redwoods. I used to live in Northern California, and I love redwoods. California redwood trees are absolutely amazing creatures. They grow in little families, so you never see one redwood tree all by itself. They interconnect their roots. So the word family doesn't even really apply. It's more like one big organism. Anyway, I love the hell out of them, but we don't have the money for that, so I left it for the time being. And instead I've turned my attention to a tram corridor. I'm trying to resolve how this tram is going to move through this district. Like I said, I'm not going to use buses, so the trams are going to provide all of the public transportation. And I think that the tram is probably going to run in a loop across the entire island. So for right now, it's going to have sort of a horseshoe shape. I'm adding these stations, which I found on the workshop. They're really cool. Technically, they count as parks, so they raise happiness as well. But they're also very functional tram stations, and they're absolutely beautiful. The trams are not going to be running by the end of this episode. I'm sorry for that, but I do want to put in the tracks just so they kind of hold their place, and I can see how they fit into the neighborhood. This bit isn't terribly interesting, so I'm just going to crank it up to ludicrous speed. Mostly I'm just resolving the rest of this neighborhood in the space that I have left, plus trying to figure out how the tram system fits into it. And as I'm editing this, it's giving me a headache, so we're just going to skip to the next part. Ironwood gets more detail based on my experience with American campsites. We'll put down little families of redwood trees with ferns and pines and all kinds of stuff that I really like. I'll probably add more to Ironwood off camera, but in the meantime, now that the neighborhood is basically done, I'm going to go back and detail some of the empty spots, starting with the traffic circle. And I've had this idea for a long time, even before I started thinking about making Allantia, which is this sort of unnaturally large tree, maybe even magically large tree. Something that'll make this neighborhood a real focal point. And I've got this mod that allows me to increase the size of trees, and so that's what I've done. And we have a giant tree now, and I might even make it bigger. The size of this tree still seems kind of plausible, and I don't want that. I want it to be an implausibly large tree. That mod does have a little problem, however, which is that it doesn't change the LOD distance, which means that if you zoom out a little bit, the tree will change to a lower resolution version of itself at the same distance as a regular tree. And so it ends up looking like a blob at a distance. Anyway, that's a thing that I'll take care of off camera. So here again, I'm going to try to resolve the public transit corridor, which, as I often do, I totally forgot to think about before I started building. So we're going to blast a few homes to get it in there. But it's really important, and my Sims are going to use the hell out of it, so it's worth losing a few buildings over. I like to pop down to ground level periodically to see what a place feels like. This forest is pretty good. It's a little thin. You can see the sky, which is not how real forests are. At least not the ones that I like. So I'm going to come back and add more later. I think I'm basically done with this neighborhood until dense residential unlocks. The only thing left to do in this episode is to go around and make sure that everybody's needs are met, medical and fire, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to strategically place a few assets, make sure everybody's as happy as they possibly can be. And that's that. I'm going to come back off camera and solve this traffic circle, detail it a little bit, make it more naturalistic. Next episode, it's my intention to get a little money flowing with a farming industry. I have some ideas for what a farming neighborhood would look like, and you can see that in the next one. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you soon.